Hello, this is Pastor Rich, and we're looking at Are You Working the Fields? That's the message I did this last Sunday. And in that, we're in John chapter 4, so you could open up to John chapter 4 if you want as a small group. And this is the video for the small group meeting. And we're going to be looking at three lessons that we see. So I'm going to divide it into three different sections, three different lessons we see in this passage that Jesus taught his disciples, and in so doing taught us as well. So lesson number one is that Jesus broke down barriers to the gospel, and he expects his followers to as well. And there's three specific barriers that we see in this passage that Jesus had to overcome. And the first one, as he dealt with this woman at the well, the first barrier is that she was a Samaritan. And Samaritans and Jews, they didn't get along very well. There was a lot of hatred. There's a history of hatred and hostility that grew over the years that goes all the way back to 722 BC. And it grew intensely in 450 BC. I covered some of that in the message, but the point being that this hostility became very great to the point in Jesus' day when people actually traveled from the south where Judea was to the north where Galilee was. Jesus, of course, was raised in Galilee. That's where he started his ministry, but Jerusalem is in Judea. And right in between these two spots was this area called Samaria where the Samaritans were. And Jews didn't travel into Samaria because they would be hated if they went there, and they couldn't even stand being in their land because the hatred was so that great. So they would walk all the way around the outskirts of Samaria and go up on the other side of the Jordan River and then over into Galilee. They would not go a direct route through Samaria. And we have Jesus and his disciples, and they're baptizing people. We see that in John chapter 4, verse 1 and 2. John the Baptist is baptizing people as well. But Jesus decides he's going to go back from the area of Judea to Galilee, and he said he had to go through Samaria. And verse 4 of that passage, John chapter 4, says he had to go through Samaria. And it doesn't tell us why. We know he wasn't in a hurry because he spent several days in Samaria at Sychar, at the well there. And so if he was in a hurry, that wasn't the reason he took a direct route. It appears the reason he took the route he did was because he needed to teach his disciples a lesson, or he needed to show the Samaritans God's love for them reaching this town, and probably a combination of both of those. But the first barrier Jesus had to overcome, he was teaching his disciples to overcome, is that these people they call the Samaritans, even though they were hated by the Jews, they needed to be reached. That was a barrier to the gospel that needed to be overcome. And in John chapter 4, verse 9, it says, the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?" Because Jesus was left at the well with her. The disciples had gone into town to buy food, and he had asked her for a drink. He engages a conversation with this Samaritan woman. And she says, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." She's like, how can you even be talking to me? She understood that this was a major faux pas in this particular culture. And Jesus is breaking down that barrier. He's basically telling her, you need to be reached. He's talking about living water to her as we go through this passage and allowing her to see that she has a great need that only he can fulfill. So he's breaking down that barrier. The second barrier was that she was a woman. In John 4:27, when the disciples come back from town, they see him talking with this woman. It says, just then his disciples returned and were surprised to see him talking with the woman. But no one asked him, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" I'm sure that they thought that, but they just didn't say it. But it was something that was considered completely, totally inappropriate. And the disciples are literally speechless. Women were not supposed to be taught spiritual truths. It was considered a waste of time. And Jesus was showing right away, it's like, no, we're going to be reaching women, and including Samaritan women. In John chapter 4, verse 10 to 14, Jesus is answering the woman at the well. When he asked for a drink, and she says, "How can you ask me for a drink?" Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them the spring of water welling up to eternal life," which is what he's saying she needs. So he's destroying these barriers to let her know her needs so that he can reach her with living water, with really what he can provide for her. The third barrier, so we see that she was a hated Samaritan. She was a woman that he should not have been dealing with in public. And the third barrier was that she was sinful. She was an immoral Samaritan woman, maybe one of the more immoral people in the town. Verse 6 says that this happened at Jacob's well at noon, or some of your translations will say the 6th hour. It went from 6 a.m., and that's when they started with daylight, so the 6th hour would be about noon. So this was in the middle of the day, the heat of the day, and this woman was by herself at a well half mile outside of her hometown in the heat of day. Now, this is highly unusual, and she probably needed to do this because she was a social outcast in her own town. Either the other women didn't welcome her, or she was concerned about the disapproving glares that she would get if she were with these other women. So she's doing this to avoid all of that. And so Jesus sees through her immorality to her great need, and he lets her know that he knows about her sinful life. In John 4:16-18, he told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband." That's scandalous. What you have just said is quite true. She had had 5 husbands, and the person she's living with now isn't even her husband. That could be scandalous in our day, but in that day and time, highly scandalous. This was somebody with a sinful pattern that was unusually bad even for the culture at that time. So the disciples rejoin Jesus, and they're surprised to see him talking with this woman, but they're soon to learn that Jesus is about breaking down barriers, and he's going to be teaching them that they need to as well. And he's really making a statement to them as well as caring for this woman legitimately and showing that we're going to break down barriers. She may have 3 strikes against her. She may be a very sinful Samaritan woman, but she needs me, and I'm available to her. And as Jesus' representatives, as his followers, as the people who are his ambassadors on this earth, we need to look for opportunities to righteously break down barriers. There's some barriers that are going to be really hard to break down. We want to break down barriers as much as we righteously can in order to be able to present the gospel and introduce people to Jesus. So right now you're going to get into your groups and talk and discuss the questions that are come up the screen, and then after that we'll come back, hit play, and we'll go to part 2. Welcome back. We are looking at the second lesson now that we see in this passage. I hope you have a great discussion on the first lesson that we're looking at. The second lesson is that Jesus is going to use anyone who is willing. Now, the immoral Samaritan woman here becomes his ambassador to the town. Jesus uses her as his mouthpiece to bring the entire town to himself. In John 4:28-30, it says, "Then leaving her water jar," which is pretty amazing that she would do that in the heat of the day, she's concerned about the town now. "Leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, 'Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?'" She probably understands more about Jesus right now than maybe some of her disciples do at this point. They came out of the town and made their way toward him. So she goes and she's excited about Jesus, so much so that she's saying, "Come, he's here right now. Let's go see. I think this could be the Messiah." And so Jesus uses this immoral Samaritan woman to reach the town, a town his disciples were just in and probably didn't even think about bringing to Jesus. And she was an outcast in her society. And if he can use someone like that, then he can use us as well. The key is that she was willing. And we have to be willing in order to be his ambassador. If you think about what this woman had against her as far as this town goes, well, first of all, the woman was confused in her theology. In John chapter 4, when you look at some of that section, she didn't have a great theology, and Jesus was kind of correcting her theology at times, trying to get her to think right. So she didn't have a great theology. Similarly, she probably didn't have any training and probably wasn't very well educated. Being a woman in that culture and the type of woman she was in that town, probably didn't have any training or degree or anything of any kind that someone would think that they would listen to. And she also had probably little positive influence. Of all the people in that town, she would be one of the ones you'd least think would be available to reach the town on something like a moral issue and bringing them to the Messiah and understanding who Jesus is. I can only imagine the low self-esteem that she must have had. So if he's able to use her, think about how he could also be able to use us. But the key is we have to be willing. We didn't see that willingness in the disciples at this point, at least as it related to that town. But we do see it in this immoral Samaritan woman. So God can use her. So get together again in your groups and have a discussion, and we'll come back for our third part, a third lesson that we see in this passage. Well, welcome back. I hope you had a great discussion. We're going to go to part 3 at this point, and we're going to be seeing that the third lesson here is that the spiritual harvest is all around us. We have to have eyes looking for that. So we want to be breaking down barriers. We need to be willing to be used. We need to be looking at the fields and understand the ripe for harvest and be picking the fruit where it's ripe from a spiritual standpoint. So the woman talks to the town. The town's coming out to meet Jesus. In John 4:30, it says they came out of the town and made their way toward him. I think this is the most amazing object illustration I could possibly think of. I can only imagine the impact this had on the disciples. I could imagine maybe this hurt a little bit. Maybe it was instructive, but I don't think they would have forgotten this. So the object illustration he has, the town's coming out and Jesus is talking to him, and it's a half mile on a flat surface to the town in the middle of the day. They'd see the town coming out to them. And in John chapter 4, verse 31 to 35, it says, meanwhile, his disciples urged him, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat you know nothing about. Then his disciples said to each other, could someone have brought him food? My food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. And so he's just like the disciples are now thinking like the Samaritan woman was earlier. The Samaritan woman needed living water, spiritual water, and she was thinking physical when she was talking about a spiritual truth. Now this is happening to the disciples. They're worried about physical food, and Jesus has said there's something of a spiritual nature which is greater importance. And he goes on to say, don't you have a saying, so it's a probably idiom of the day, it's still 4 months until harvest. And you think about it, most things that you plant, it takes about 4 months before they're harvested. I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. And what would they have seen? They would have seen the town coming out. And he's saying, here's the harvest. Here's why we're here. This is what's important. And who was leading them was an immoral Samaritan woman. I do think this would have been difficult for the disciples. They would have seen this town coming out. And I wonder if they were thinking, hey, there's the guy we bought bread from. There's the person we bought wine from. Hey, over there's the person we asked for directions. Whatever it might have been, they would have probably recognized people in the town that they need to think about introducing to Jesus. And this woman that they probably looked down upon, and especially if they'd known anything about her moral character, they really would look down. Or probably would not have taken the energy to spit at her. This person who was beneath them is doing what they didn't do. She's bringing the entire town out and introducing them to Jesus, a town they were just in and probably didn't even cross their minds. I can only imagine what they were thinking and what they went through, what they were experiencing in that situation. It is left up somewhat to the imagination, but it is interesting to think about what they were experiencing. I think this is an object illustration they probably would have remembered. And there's something that we learn from it too. We need to be aware of the fields that are there. We need to go where they are ripe. We need to be thinking strategically. We need to be looking at people that way. We need to be evaluating what are our fields? What are your fields? And so now we're going to take a little bit of time and we're going to put something again up on the screen for you to interact with as a group. And when you get done with that, you're done as far as the study portion of this goes. I thank you for participating, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. God bless.